Without further delay, everyone, thank you for coming out. Yeah. Well, so let's see. Let's just start. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Xavier. I'm an alumni of Sac State. Yes, I know. Hello. I'm an alumni of Sac State. I currently work for Google. I've been working there for about 3 years. I met this person and this person at the alumni panel event that happened about a month and a half ago. And then I offered to come speak to other clubs and students if anybody wanted to, and he took me up on it. So, I was given a sort of vague prompt about what to discuss here, and I was also told it would be a relatively small group. So, the format of this is somewhat going to be conversational. Feel free to interrupt with questions for the most part. I'm going to roughly go over my sort of path to Google, my path to computer science, and then from there my path to Google, and then sort of what I do with it. A rough overview of what I sort of do in the job. So, I got a degree in computer science and a degree in mathematics.
Okay. So, double major?
Yes.
Okay. And then follow up to that, what were you interested in college? What inspired you to take the classes that you took? Did the classes that you take at all matter in the future? You know what I mean?
So that's sort of hard. Okay, so it's sort of complicated. I would honestly say that most classes, the vast majority of classes you take, at least will matter in only very specific scenarios. You're taught from the book, you're taught theory for the most part, which makes sense. That's about the only thing you can't teach. It's hard to teach practical skills in a university. That's what clubs and going out and finding like internships and whatnot are for. That said, I would say honestly that most of my classes and most of the classes you take do not directly, you're not going to directly like call upon specific knowledge. For instance, if any of you have taken, say, 134, your databases class, if that's still 134 because they changed it before. Yeah. Okay. I do work with databases. I don't work with relational databases, and they teach relational databases here, as an example. So some of the underlying theory on how databases work and some of the underlying theory on how to structure data, semi-useful, but it's all really specific knowledge a lot of the time. Yes. In general, another really specific thing is, for instance, I got a math degree. I took a lot of really specific math classes that are not really useful 99% of the time. But my linear algebra class, which is something that some of you will probably take and some of you won't, just because the way the class structures here work, you get choices on your math classes. Linear algebra turns out to be really useful for some of the work I do, some of the time. One of the projects I did really required it, or really required some basis in that knowledge, and then I never used it again. Things like that. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, but I was thinking like, so we have to take electives here, right?
Oh, yes.
Did you take them in a way that aligned with your interests? Did your interest inspire you going out into the world? You know what I mean? Like that kind of, yeah.
So notice I said I got a double major?
Yeah.
I was being really cheeky about my elective choices. So I don't know if it's still the same now because every couple of years they change up the credit requirements for various things. But when I was going through, if you were really specific about all of your Section B elective, your math and science electives you took, you could get a free minor in mathematics with the electives you were required to take. And you were about 5 or 6 classes away from a major in mathematics. Which I looked at and I said, oh, that's a math degree. And then I regretted it. Turns out math is hard. That is how I chose my Section B electives. My computer science electives were a bit different. I took 2 different 199s. 199s, if you don't know what those are sort of experimental elective classes that professors like sort of petition the department to be allowed to do, and then do them for a semester, and the department may or may not choose to actually make those permanent electives in the future. You have a question?
I'm trying to sign up for 199. How did you go about getting a professor to sign off on it? Did you ask them to come to you?
One of the 199s was one the professor explicitly petitioned the department to be allowed to put on, so it was listed as a regular course and students could sign up for it. That was, I forgot her name, Muyan something, if she's still here.
So I think I don't know if it's changed, but 199 is like special problems, and 196 is like their experimental ABCD, the letter.
No, that sounds right.
Okay, yeah. So I think, were you asking about 199, the special problems?
I've been informed by other people that it's difficult to secure a position in a 199 class.
They tend to fill up pretty quickly, yes. One of them was just a GPU programming course put on by one of the professors, and I really enjoyed it, and it's never been useful to me.
GLSL kind of stuff, or
CUDA programming.
CUDA, okay.
Yes. The other one was a competitive programming specific course that we forced Krovitz to put on. We told him that we needed practice, and other schools got practice, and a lot of us did this, and there was definitely going to be enough students for one, and he said, okay, I'll do it. So we sort of browbeat him into it. Other than that, my other electives didn't super matter. I just took whatever seemed interesting. I took the AI course that Gordon puts on. I don't know. Gordon's not here anymore, so I don't know who does that. I don't remember what my other elective was, but there was one.
Was registration tough to get into on your end? Because I went through some hurdles the past 3 semesters, and it's been frustrating for me.
The computer science department has pretty much always been impacted, unfortunately. I think it's only gotten worse since I graduated. Yeah, there's not much help there. If anything you can do to get priority registration, try, but there's not a lot of great avenues for that either.
I mean, the only thing we could do is sign up for MESA. They all get strictly priority registration.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
You're part of MESA?
Yes.
Oh, man. I'm going to try to sign up sometime soon.
I don't know how often they are to students now. When I was coming here, they met and exceeded all their enrollment limit very quickly. And then basically said for like 3 years that nobody else could join.
So Jim, just to kind of, so you would say that you took your electives that were interesting. Did you have any like projects, anything else you were doing? Did you have any internships or professional experience prior?
I'm gonna try and transition smoothly to this.
Sure.
So, a quick note on that is I believe they still offer like certificates here for like game programming, security, things like that. If you're interested in one of those, you might go for it.
They're kind of hard to get now.
That's fair.
It's like 4 classes, and you can only get 3 electives, so it's kind of like
Fair enough.
yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Those are valid to go for if you like really want one, and apparently if you are capable of getting it. As said, I just sort of chose my electives for what I thought would be interesting. They aren't materially valuable, if that makes sense. A lot of the development you'll be doing, like electives, it's about you learning for yourself and trying to figure out what you're interested in, leading into special projects. I didn't do that. So I didn't get an internship. I didn't do. If you were to say I did special projects, it wouldn't be like projects in the go out and develop a website, develop a program sense. I did a lot of competitive programming. As mentioned, one of my 199s was a competitive programming course with Krovitz. ICPC doesn't exist anymore, but that was a programming contest that we held locally here and then sent people to a regional competition. I did a lot of HackerRank, which hosts weekly and monthly competitions, actually multiple weekly competitions. That would be really the majority of my project stuff. The other things I did here, though, like you don't only do project stuff. I did a lot of leadership. These two are doing. It's valuable. What's the word for it? Experience. But what type of experience is it? You have to learn to organize and communicate with your officers. You have to organize around a group of people. Logistics, yes. You have to. It's learning logistics, which is not something you really learn a lot, and it turns out to be very important in a professional career.
So would you say then, so even just speaking generally within computer science, what would you say your interest was, if not is?
So my interest has changed a lot. It's going to be a hard tangent real quick.
Yep.
A lot of you are a lot younger than I was, younger than I am now. How many of you know what Flash games are? About half of you, cool. So there is a dead technology that Adobe made called Flash. They didn't actually make it, they bought it from somebody else who made it.
Didn't they phase out Flash for HTML5?
Flash never ran on HTML5. It was a separate. It required a separate plugin for browsers to run.
Because some of us can't play Flash computer games anymore because we don't have the Flash plugin anymore.
Correct. Flash is a dead browser code running thing. Before HTML5 was all nice and worked, Flash was the way you made web browsers have interactive experiences. Turns out a lot of people make games for these things. I got addicted to these in high school. Very addicted to these in high school. I was going to be a mechanical engineer in college, and then I decided that I wanted to make Flash games, which is not a career choice. So it's not. It's a really bad idea, especially because Flash is dead now. Also, it turns out making video games isn't a great career either. It's something you do if you're really, really passionate about it. I was passionate about playing video games, not making them. But I did like computer science, it turns out. Sort of, how did I say it? No, I said competitive programming. It turns out I fell into something else that I really enjoyed. The sort of work that the way you have to think when you're solving problems is what it turns out I really liked. And it goes really hand in hand with programming. So that's how I ended up finishing my computer science degree, rather than going into games or anything like that. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So you were saying that it's really like the process of discovery and solving that translated into, and then
Yes.
And then you did some hackathons or codathons, organized some stuff.
I did very few hackathons.
Oh, okay.
I did a couple.
Yeah.
Hackathons are really
Or
useful.
HackerRank, that's what you said.
HackerRank was a website. I did a competitive program. I did a couple hackathons. Hackathons are really, really useful for trying to quickly make something, which I'm not very good at. I did not get most of my actual project development experience until after I graduated. I did a couple of projects here. They're not representative of how you usually do a project. Yeah.
And then, so how would you say you kind of queued yourself up professionally then?
Accident. So that leads into the sort of really weird path I took to my career. I got my degrees here, and then I graduated into a pandemic. A lot of you started into a pandemic. I graduated into a pandemic. Tangent again. I did not do work as a software engineer or computer scientist when I was in the university. I did work as a IT assistant in Riverside, actually. Turns out, I like IT as well. A lot of working with computers and trying to solve problems that people have works out. Working with people, I'll take it or leave it, honestly. People can sometimes be hard. But there was a path there as well for me to go into server administration and things like that. So I was getting my certs for server administration because I was having a hard time. I was having a hard time in the job search. How to say it? I did not get many interviews. I got a couple, but I set myself a deadline that if I didn't get a job in software engineering by, I think it was 18 months or 24 months or something, I would open up to IT-related positions as well. To be fair, this is a sort of the terminology around this is weird because a lot of companies and the government calls computer science or calls software engineering IT, which makes this really easy to try and explain sometimes. But when I say IT, I mean servicing computers for a entity of some sort, with a focus because I was trying to get certs for this in like wider administration, network administration, things like that. And then I got really lucky. So as previously said, I did a lot of competitive programming. I don't do a lot anymore. Google has a sort of hidden competitive programming challenge that is still up and still exists. It just, I don't know if it's used that much anymore. Called FooBar. It's got 7 in ascending difficulty from relatively easy to brutally hard, and it'll take multiple days to try to solve problems. And I decided that I wanted to do it, and then did it. And I did about 5 questions, and then I got distracted and didn't get more done. You're allowed to pause after each question. You're given an amount of time once you start a question to finish it. I just never came back to do the 6th question. But a recruiter reached out to me from doing FooBar, because after the 3rd question, you're allowed to directly submit a resume through FooBar. And that is how I got reached out to a recruiter from Google. And then it was a 14-month period between getting reached out to and getting hired because pandemic happened, which was awful, really awful. Google is notoriously slow as it is. It is competitive with government positions for how long it takes to talk to somebody and then to get an interview and to get an offer. So, yes.
Is it even competitive with Apple and Microsoft in terms of operating systems still?
Rephrase the question.
Like, while some computers, like even the well-branded ones, like MSI and Asus have Windows, and Lenovo too, and of course Macintosh has obviously Mac OS from Apple. We have the well-branded ones like Lenovo, Asus, Acer again, but with an OS developed by Google called Chrome operating system. Is this also stiff competition between the 3?
If this wasn't being recorded, I would answer that.
Hit pause over here real quick.
Well, I think there's a question in the back.
Looked at Google FooBar just now. It said that it's invitation only. How did you acquire that information?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's not
repeat
invitation
the
only.
question.
So he looked up Google FooBar and he found out that's invitation only. It's a bit more complicated than that. So how Google FooBar works fundamentally is if you search a bunch of computer science specific terminology in Google, it'll reveal Google FooBar to you and give you an invitation. Also, if you do Google FooBar, you get some invitations that you can give to people. Also, when Google was doing recruiting, when it was rolling out FooBar for about 3 or 4 years there, they would hide FooBar invitations in their presentations. They would have like a tree, and if you traverse the tree in order, it would result in an invitation, things like that. Just hidden in the background of the slide and things like that.
That's really cool.
Yes. That's how a friend of mine got into it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Also Sac 16. So I got his internship. That said, I decided to do this well after I had anybody who I could rely on for an invitation, or I turned down FooBar before, and if you turn it down, it doesn't show back up. So if you ever get it, don't deny it. Turns out somebody reverse engineered the invitation generation and then put up their code for that on GitHub, so you could just generate an invitation for FooBar. So I did that.
Is that still up?
From
I was looking at it too, and I see it as FooBar 2000. So check it out.
So then, so we've kind of talked about a little bit about how you went through college, and then a little bit about the transition phase. I suppose, what is it that, so we've kind of said you do software engineering, but like, what is your...
Software engineering is very broad. You can do a lot of things in software engineering. Not to harp on it, like there's front engineers, there's web development, which is not necessarily front end, because you could just develop a front end that's not web, just for like a program on a computer. Back end, full stack, so on and so forth. And even these aren't really descriptive of the type of work you're doing a lot of the time, because you could be doing really domain-specific work as well. You could do AI, you could do research, you could do data science, which is still not descriptive. What I do is, it will require context on where I work at Google. So we'll give that. I work in Workspace for Education, which probably is not going to make a lot of sense unless you know what Workspace is. I'm going to assume most of you have used Google's, like Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google, blanking on what they're called. These used to be called, what's it called? These used to be called Google Apps, and then they got rebranded to G Suite, and then got rebranded again to Google Workspace about 3 or so years ago.
It's 3 o'clock.
Thank you.
Then it got rebranded to Google Workspace about 3 years ago. Google Workspace is basically a business offering that includes identity generation for entities, businesses, schools, Google Workspace for Education, so on and so forth. And it packages in usability of these apps and a bunch of other app offerings that aren't generally available unless you have a Workspace account. Google Workspace for Education is Google Workspace for schools. Why is this different? Schools have kids. Google collects data and can't do a lot of that with kids. So there's a bunch of restrictions around how Google can work with child data, and that differ between, say, here in Europe, a bunch of other things like that. So my job is to work on the core. I work on the core service of Workspace to specifically make changes that allows us to work with children. And I can't be more specific than that, sadly. But what that means is I do a lot of backend work. Specifically, Google has a bunch of really large, really complicated services that no one person can fully understand. Unfortunately, it's a mega company. That happens. What that means is things sort of work in one way, and a bunch of teams exist to solve really specific problems. My team exists to solve the specific problem of changing how Workspace works. Workspace is worked on by a much larger team elsewhere at Google, making really small fundamental changes and making a path to make education work, which means like changing fundamental things like what data can be collected, how that data is collected, how users are tagged, and things like that. How to say this? We aren't allowed to know how old children are. If you're a child, we can't know how old you are. Full stop. Knowing that is a fundamental account trait that is core to how a lot of Google works, because advertising company. There's a bunch of things like that we have to fundamentally change. What this means is I work on a really specific domain in a really specific I work with Google systems, but not in a way that's very technically complex. Most of my job is navigating bureaucratic complexities, bureaucratic and system complexities, rather than solving hard problems.
So I have like 2 questions. I guess one goes back a bit and one kind of stays on this. Do you care which way?
Go.
So I guess to go back a little bit then, is that kind of, did you start in that team?
No, that's what I said. What I was going to go straight into.
Oh, cool. All right.
So this is my second team at Google. This is my third team at Google. My first team at Google was technically a training team, because that's how Google starts. They drop you into a training team, and then you get placed later. Because it turns out you get a couple of months or a couple of weeks, depending on how you're hired, to try and figure out how Google's technology works so that you can hit the ground walking. That doesn't happen. Google is very complex. I unfortunately can't explain why. But that means that my first team at Google was training. My second team at Google was Identity SRE. I need to explain what SRE is. So SRE is the concept that Google made, Site Reliability Engineer, that those words don't mean anything related to what they do, except for reliability. What an SRE is an engineer whose specific job is to make services reliable. The site thing, don't know why that's there. What that means is their mandate is to work on, their mandate is to make, I'm trying to phrase this in a way that's not bad. So for instance, reporting and metrics tools, and then how to use reporting and metrics tools, how to read and interpret that data, how to fundamentally work with Google systems at a lower level than most people do, so that they can like precisely identify why something is a problem, things like that. It's a different mandate than a product team. They work on reliability. SREs are a concept that is being adopted. I was going to say slowly, but a lot of larger companies also now have that. Amazon has SREs, Twitter has SREs, Netflix has SREs. That is a concept that they took from Google, and it's a good idea. It doesn't sound really important, but it turns out when you're running a lot of different things and a lot of different people work on different parts of those things and don't really fundamentally know how the systems that run those things work, having groups of people who do is important. Not how the system works, but how the systems that those things run on. Yes. So my mandate in Identity SRE was to work on was to work on cryptographically securing a specific way that we accumulated metrics such that an insider could not de-anonymize the data, which is a much more complex problem than I normally work on. It does not sound like what I do right now at all. That's because it's a different team. Identity SRE works with Identity. They are the team that works with the core fundamental. Outside of Google, this is known Gaia identities. Google calls the accounts that, like the fundamental account underpinning the accounts that people make, whether it's a good Gmail account or a YouTube account or things like that, and those are separate things, a Gaia account. So every account that is made by Google is a Gaia account. It's the team that is in charge of overseeing that. So accumulating metrics on how, specifically in this case failures, but on these things, there's a specific way that the world, there's a couple of different ways that are used to this that I don't think I can go into. But a research paper done, funnily enough, by Google turned out that one of these ways was somewhat possibly, technically, theoretically prone to insider risk, possible to reverse one of the ways that, the way that this type of metric was being accumulated. They're a really complex process that I don't think I can do, and I was the one working on it. And so my job was to fix that, which involved learning a lot of cryptography, which is not a class I took here, not something I'm an expert in.
I guess rapid skill acquisition is kind of a...
Yes, rapid skill acquisition has definitely been a hallmark of my career. I don't think I've gone 3 months without having to learn something. And I don't mean like learn something small, I mean like learn an entirely new topic. When I said that there's a bunch of different systems at Google, there's 5 different ways that code can be run on a broad level. As a server, as a batch process. 2 different ways you can run it as a batch process. 2 different ways you can run it as a server. So on and so forth. Also, front-end and back-end servers are handled completely differently. All of these are various different high-level things that I had to learn.
So what was kind of the process? So different companies obviously have different sort of corporate cultures and structures. Yeah. Some will rotate you a lot. Some really want you to follow a path. Some will yada 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 yada. So what was it? Is it nominal at Google to be rotated into kind of what needs to be done? What is and on to build on that kind of what was that process sort of like?
So it sounds like there's 2 different questions here.
I suppose so.
One of the questions I think I heard was moving between teams, and the other question I think I heard was project assignment.
I suppose, yeah.
So moving between teams is sort of self-organized. If you decide that you want to go somewhere else, you apply internally to a different position at a different team that has an open position, and you don't have to tell your manager that. You can just do that. And if when you interview with the other team, and if they say yes, you say yes. Cool, you're good. You go. And then you apologize to your manager. If you like them, you don't. If you don't. Did I answer that part of the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Project assignment is very specific to the culture that you're in. And culture is sort of weird because sometimes culture is uniform on a broad level from like all the way up at the org, where the org could have 10 to 30,000 people in it, or it's
Can you explain what org? What do you mean by org?
organization.
Org. Gotcha.
Yes. Which is a really loose term because there's not a good way of trying to describe how an infrastructure, how the bureaucratic infrastructure works at Google. And that's effectively what I'm trying to do right now, as it is.
I've heard that it's like a lot. It's kind of in some ways managed up, that lots of teams.
So
I guess it
you would
depends.
hear
what
very
side.
conflicting reports on this from depending on how long somebody has been at Google and where they are. Because how long you've been at is a very, I'd say it's a very broad, not necessarily true to every person, but that's how trends work, thing, that the longer you've been at Google, the more rose-tinted glasses you have. I've been at Google for 3 years, and I have more rose-tinted glasses than people who've been at Google since after they did their layoffs, and less rose-tinted glasses than people who've been there for 5 or longer years. That said, how projects are assigned is pretty much determined by the decision makers, but the decision makers are different are different because of the culture that they're in. In my org specifically, the decision makers go up about 3 levels. So my manager's manager's manager is pretty much where the decisions get made on projects I do. But in more chaotic orgs, like Cloud, which is the largest org in Google, it has about 30,000, 36, 37, I don't know, something like that. Lots of engineers. And they do a lot of things in there. It is definitely the most move fast, break things part of Google. Decisions made on what projects to pursue are made as short as the manager you have, sometimes, depending on what project you're on and things like that. I have a friend who was in Cloud and left Cloud because they did not like working there, whose projects would change pretty much on the whim of their tech lead, which is not their manager, based off of what they thought they could get done in time to say they finished something. So it really depends on where you are. Our decisions are usually made based off of what laws have been passed in the last 24 months, because that is unfortunately our mandate. Don't get sued.
Makes sense. Big organization have to really abide by rules made especially for
Yes. Specifically because we work with kids. Yes.
Right.
So with the laws, are they just all laws in general, or is it laws that
Any law that could apply to Google.
So you're looking at laws that are in like.
I'm not a lawyer, but a lot of the things. Do things based on U.S. laws and so on and so forth. It's hard to craft an experience specifically for a single country, so usually we broadly do everything for everyone. Sometimes we don't. I can't talk about
I
that.
feel like China does.
Oh, we don't operate in China.
I am.
That's like the only country in the world we don't operate in.
And North Korea.
Also, yep, well, yes. Looks like somebody else was using your hand, and I won't.
Did you have a question? So it sounds like you kind of did some degree of like mathematics and engineering, and then you kind of got shifted into operations.
So
can you just speak about the people working around you? Were they all CS people? Were there engineer, like actual engineer majors, so on and so forth? And then your experience as well.
just working through it.
Sure.
I'll talk about the people first. So, when I was on Identity SRE, everybody there in Identity, very supportive. SRE work is incredibly intensive. So I was on a 6-month rotation with that team. So I did not get rotated into their on-call rotation, which is a 24-hour on-call with a 5-minute SLA on response, which really means that you need to get up to speed on the entire identity service stack, which is a very large and complicated stack that they were in the process of renovating, and are still in the process of renovating 3 years later. before you could do an on-call, and your first several months of on-call are actually as a shadow, and then with somebody else, as a shadow for somebody else, and then somebody else shadowing you to make sure that you're doing it right, but you're the primary in that case. I did not have enough time to get up to speed with the stack and then do that because I was on a 6-month rotation and was not guaranteed that I was going to be on the team after that. I was not on the team after that. SRE teams are, SRE in general is a very stressful experience because of all the on-call work you do. There's a specific thing actually with SREs that, because they have a tier 1 low SLA on-call, that they get on-call compensation, which is basically more vacation time. They need that. It's very stressful. That is to say, I love them. They're great people. I actually still communicate with some of them. I didn't know how to do SRE. So I was very glad to go to a different team that wasn't SRE after that. Yes?
How much vacation times do you guys usually get? And they usually are the ones that have to schedule vacation time before a particular deadline when you're working at Google?
The current standard is you start at 20 days a year before any other modifications. It's pretty laissez-faire. You can take it whenever you need to, with caveats of like don't screw anybody else over.
Is Google part of that initiative that a lot of companies are getting involved in when it comes to gaming harassment and online bullying, where there's going to be like sets of rules, and if you break those rules, you're blacklisted from like cross platforms and stuff?
I don't know. I don't know.
There was a question there. So given that there is quite of a race between Microsoft, Google, and the realm of cloud and AI specifically, I know Google has a lot of projects in AI, and they have closed some of them, but others they are expanding very quickly, and others they're just speed bump. How is the implementation part of AI or in-house projects with your day-to-day operation? Because Microsoft has been doing this very successfully. Because I know your execs board have raised a lot of arguments. How did that change?
I'm trying to think about what I'm allowed to say.
Oh.
Google works on AI. BART exists. Google is experimenting with making AI work for Google as well as for other people that Google serves. And that's all I can say, unfortunately. Somebody back there? Yes.
Are you able to speak up?
The interview stage?
Yeah, the interview stage of getting through how many stages there were, what asked you during the
Repeating for the question was sort of an installation of the interview process, the stages, an overview of interviewing for Google, pretty much. This is the mic, right? Yeah. So interviewing with Google is somewhat malleable. I will describe how it's done. So generally, you either apply or you reach out to a recruiter. Either way, there is between 1 and N phone calls between you and the recruiter before you get an interview. Those phone calls are pretty much just, sometimes those are emails as well, but usually the recruiter likes to call you. It's not a requirement. That's just pretty much setting up the basics of coordinating, like what language you want to interview in, what preferences you have for interview times like that. That's part of the process. That's not really the interviews themselves, though. Then there's between 1 and 3+ N interviews. Why do I phrase it like that? So there is a culture fit interview. We call it the Googliness interview, but it's a culture fit, basically. It's basically, are you a not awful human being? It's hard to tell sometimes. Then there is a number of technical interviews. Any of these interviews, including the culture fit one, might need to be redone at a later time because of some fuzzy information. That doesn't happen very often. That's why I say +N. There is at least one technical interview. I'm talking for software engineering specifically. This isn't true of other roles, by the way. It's probably somewhat true for other roles, but I don't know as much about this. There's at least one technical interview, and depending on how strongly you did in that, there is 1 or 2 more. this is to say you could have between 1 and 3 technical interviews. And then you wait for a while, and you get told whether you're getting an offer or not. Does that answer the question? What I didn't say is the process can be very long because Google is slow. Yes.
What kind of stuff do they ask you on the technical interviews?
Okay, so it's a cop-out answer when I say leak code, but I will try to explain. Technical programming questions as opposed. Okay, so interviewing in general is weird. There's been like phases in interviewing where they were going to ask brain teasers, and the brain teasers don't test programming, so people could be like generally smart, but then like not be able to actually do the job. And they were like, okay, we're going to ask brain teaser programming questions, and that's where we got this like whole competitive programming style, leak code style questions that get asked in interviews now. I just skipped over like 15 years of interviewing in about 30 seconds. 15 years of interviewing evolution. The technical questions that can be asked are very broad. I was asked a technical question that was effectively, how would I infrastructurally design and serve a website that played a video game? Sorry, that you played a video game on, which is not an algorithms question. And I sort of fumbled that because I'm an algorithms person, not an infrastructure person. I could answer that much better now, but back then that's not my skill set. But then there's the leak code style algorithms questions, which are most of what I'd say to expect most of the time. Does that answer the question? Or did you want something more specific?
Well, I don't know how specific you can get about like interview questions and stuff, but
Like, how would you recommend? Sorry. How would you recommend we practice?
Okay, so right now, the best way to practice is there's a couple of books. Kraken Coding Review exists. Leak Code exists. Those are pretty much the best ways to practice today. The problem, in my opinion, with both of those is that Kraken Coding, everybody who interviews has read Kraken the Coding Interview. Or something to that style. They already know what you're expected to know going in, and so on and so forth. It's a great tool to prepare you with certain tools, but the problem is that an interviewer doesn't want to see rote repeated knowledge. They want to see how you solve a problem. Leak code is the same way, and that when you do that, you're practicing. You can be practicing problem solving, but oftentimes you're also practicing specific solutions, which is somewhat problematic for actually doing interviews. I do some interviews, by the way. It makes signal that you're getting from it sort of hard. I forgot the question I was asking.
Practicing for interviews.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that said, those are very valid ways to practice to answer a question correctly. I wouldn't say those are the best ways to practice to be able to interview correctly, which is a weird way to say that, because those are also the best ways to. Those.
Have you heard of the STARS format?
No. Well, maybe. I might have heard of something else.
It's I forget what it stands for. I know Chevron does it, but it's very much like they want you to have a situation, then basically how you address the situation, and then like the outcome.
I have heard of this.
Okay. Yes.
Somebody at Intel told me about it.
Mm.
Sadly, I do not get to decide how I interview. I'm given a rubric.
Mm. I see.
Which, without going into interviewing theory, is not a bad thing. I don't want to go deep into that right now.
Sure.
And yes, there is interviewing theory.
I can only imagine.
I really like the spontaneity of ICPC because you get questions that are different than the way a leak code question is given. A lot of leak code questions, for example, you're told to implement some type of, you're told to implement a method that they describe for you. Oftentimes, questions can be significantly more open-ended in an interview to the degree like a problem is described in a vague sense and you're asked to solve it in a vague sense, which is hard to practice. It's hard to practice because the answers to that can be open-ended. the best way once you have basics of problem solving underfoot, which is like you're able to do LeetCodes, is probably to then go seek out mock interviews. There's a bunch of different mock interview questions and question sites that exist, and just convincing a friend to do mock interviews for you is probably the best way to practice after you have basic problem solving. Yes. Hello.
So you kind of touched on the fact that you were or having worked at Google now. What avenues would you say for us that you can explain to some more recruiters,
Do you want the really unfortunate answer? So the tech industry is in a bit of a cold spurt right now. About, what year is it, 2022? Mid-2022. Mid-2022, most of the tech industry stopped hiring drastically. There's a lot of different theories for why. I'm not going to go deep into that because it's not my expertise. But it did happen. Lots of companies laid off. Hiring hasn't really sped back up to near what that was before, what that was when it slowed down. So that is to say, right now, it's a very competitive market. Sorry, when I say competitive, I mean right now it's very hard to get your foot in now. Yes. The best ways to probably get yourself seen at this point, if FUBAR still exists, that's a great one, but FUBAR is very hard. I honestly wouldn't recommend FUBAR to most people. I had a very, very strong competitive programming background, and I struggled getting through question 5. That said, any way that you can get Google to reach out to you is good. One of the reasons that Google reached out to me is because I had a breadth of, what's the word for it? Extracurricular experience, specifically all of the leadership I did in college. Sorry, did I mention that? I did a lot of leadership in college. I was the president of ACM for about a year, and I did a lot of other leadership roles inside of ACM as well, including running the ICPC for a year, so a bunch of different things. Differentiation is important because Google sees a lot of technically competent people. They don't see. It's very hard to say I'm more technically competent than somebody else on paper. It is a lot easier to show a breadth of soft skills on paper, if that makes sense. But even then, you're in a sea of resumes, and it's sort of hard. That's generally true of all job searching, though.
So you recommend that people expand and become more well-rounded, that way
Yes.
utilize more skills?
Pretty much everybody who applies is going to have technical competency, I'm going to say. I'm not going to say a degree because it's not actually true. I've worked with multiple people who do not have computer science degrees or math degrees. Somebody I know has a physics degree. Somebody else I know has a degree in history and decided to train themselves into programming and then apply to Google and got in. And they were very smart, but they did not have on paper the skills that they needed. I don't actually know how they got in. I'm not saying they shouldn't be there.
Sure.
I'm just saying I don't know how they got past the filters.
So, which kind of, sorry, are there any other questions?
Somebody I know was reached out to Google because they had a very, very popular project on GitHub. Somebody else who went here. If you know what Ish is, which is a like iPhone terminal x86 emulator, they're the person who made Ish.
I know emulators. I know like Dolphin.
I'm not going to go see this.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, there's a bunch of not applying paths, but those are more the exception than the rule.
Makes sense.
Yes.
I think
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about a research paper which was published by Google. How does that work? Like, does Google have research teams, or do they pay like people in universities like?
Okay, so the short answer is yes. Google does research, and because Google doesn't want to be cut out of the rest of the wider research community, Google publishes most of its research as well. Not all of it. Some of that research stays in-house and maybe gets published in the future. But the vast majority of research that Google does ends up getting published and spoken about at conferences and things like that. part of this is, like I said, because Google wants to be friendly with the research community. Part of this is because the researchers want to have their names on things so that other people know that they did research. There's a bunch of different incentives here. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, how do people get into the research teams?
You be very, very good at that specific field.
Yeah.
Like, effectively leading.
Like PhD.
Yes, like PhD, has done research before, is provably incredibly smart.
And they get them like from outside, like directly from educational institutions.
People get hired directly from education. People get hired while they're in education sometimes. Generally, research is one of those more exception than the rule paths, though. It's like Google Zero level of difficulty. If you don't know what Google Zero is Google's zero-day vulnerability team, which I can't talk about other than acknowledging its existence.
That sounds like a very tough job.
Yes, Google Zero is competitive with nation states on how good they are at their jobs.
So, does anyone else have anything else? Yeah.
So would you rather doing a master's degree or doing a bachelor's degree, but like doing a...
I would never do a master's degree at Sac State.
Oh, and...
That said, another university maybe, it really depends. Sac State's master's program is awful. Sorry. I know some... Huh?
We don't really have one.
You do, it's just really bad.
Well, they're working on it.
They have a lot more fun classes.
They've been working on it for 15 years.
Yeah.
I wish you could take some of the master's courses though. They're
The master's
pretty
courses
fun.
aren't actually that good. I know several people who've gone through them. They say they're better, they aren't.
Well, I mean, just in the content is there.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Practically no, because a lot of the content has to be taught down.
Right.
Which means that the content that is theoretically there isn't really. Unfortunately.
Right.
Sorry. At a different university, maybe. It depends if you like the thing you're researching. I've often considered going back and getting a master's degree in mathematics, which I would do at Sac State. Just not the computer science program here; it's awful. For the master's computer science program is awful. The bachelor's is good enough. We're not a ranked university, but it's fine.
Did that kind of answer?
Yeah. So what should you do besides Google to have a high chance to get to public tech companies?
I sort of answered that already, but differentiation. It's the unfortunate answer is differentiation, which is really, really hard. I'll say Google is a lot more, what is the right word to use here? I think egalitarian has negative connotation. I'm going to use that. Google, like other massive companies, Amazon, Microsoft, can't be that selective in its hiring, even now when it's been significantly slowed down, because there's only so many people that come out of Stanford and Berkeley and MIT and things like that. They all have jobs, but Google and Amazon and Microsoft collectively hire about 100,000 people a year into software engineering roles. So all of the best people don't even fill up 1% of that usually. Or all of the best universities graduates don't fill up 1% of that usually. So a lot of the time, you still have a fair chance, much more of a fair chance than how do I explain this? A lot of companies follow the interviewing practices of the leading companies, but they don't follow the recruiting practices, if that makes sense. Because they're allowed to be more selective because they do not have as many pressures on hiring as many people. So if you are good enough to get an interview, you have a decent chance, as long as you can pass the interview. And good enough is usually the answer. I think roughly, if you meet the basic requirements of applying to Google, about 50% of the people get an interview, which is still better than a lot of places. And then you just have to be really good at the interview.
So that actually kind of, I know we started to answer the question already, but I think that kind of builds on it really well, that it's like, not just like what majors do you see around you and sort of the roles that they fill, but how many people, you mentioned some people have wildly different degrees than...
Well, different paths to Google, yes.
Right, exactly. And but a lot of us do consider graduate school, you know, and especially for data science, a lot of a lot of companies, when they want you to do something important, they'll want something like that from you. But how many people have you seen and ended up like working with actually have or need graduate degrees? Do you feel like you want one, or do you need one?
It really depends.
Yeah.
Here's part of the problem. Google doesn't like specialists.
It makes sense.
I said that in a really inflammatory way because somebody might disagree with me there.
Sure.
There are specialists at Google. I'm not saying that there aren't. A lot of the specialists are very, very good at being specialists. They are specialized for a reason. Like 98% of Google's technical employees are classified as software engineer. And then that last bit are the specialists. You can have specializations, but most of the time you aren't going to be hired for a specialization. You're going to be hired for a software engineering role at Google. Data scientists at Google, that is a specialization, by and large have PhDs or masters. You can do data science type work without that specialization. That just means getting onto a team where you do that. For instance, actually my first team, I did TSRE, part of the work I did was that semi-data science team. I did a lot of work with our monitoring systems, and you do a lot of data science there. Not my specialization and not the project I was on though. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah.
So if you're applying to a specialized position, yes, you want that. You can do work like that without the specialized position though, and specialized positions are much harder to get into.
So would you say then you've worked, so to, I guess, reiterate a little bit, you said that you generally see people who are more like generalists and capable of filling multiple roles and don't necessarily have higher education?
It's not necessarily capable of filling multiple roles, it's capable of picking up a role quickly. A SWE at Google is not expected to be an expert of everything. They're expected to be an expert of figuring out something that they don't know, and then able to apply a general broad base of technical experience to a specific problem.
And then, like in your training team, for example, were most of those people CS? Did they have graduate degrees? Do you know?
No. Most people don't end up having graduate degrees.
Yeah, right.
Also, unfortunate news is a graduate degree means you're at minimum getting hired on as L4, not L3, and L4 has a harder interview.
Interesting.
Honestly, a graduate program does not actually prepare you for the harder interview because you do not learn the harder interview skills. I don't know why it's like that, but it is.
Would you ever consider a management position or a higher position at Google since you have leadership experience?
I'm going to nitpick here.
All right,
you said
go
a
for it.
higher position at Google.
Right.
Technically, you can be an IC, individual contributor. That means you aren't managing people, but you are still doing code. All the way up to L10. That said, there are 4 L10s at Google who are ICs. That is not a thing most people do. Generally, IC caps out at 5, maybe 6. And then past that, you're almost always forced to go into some form of leadership. And if you're L5 or L6 IC, you're probably a tech lead of some sort, which means you're not officially leadership, but you're on paper still technical leadership. Sorry, not on paper, but you're logically still some form of technical leadership. There are technical manager roles, which our tech lead just actually transitioned to technical manager role. So this is the first time I'm going to experience work under somebody who's a technical manager. Before this, I've only had managers, and I've heard that they manage differently, which makes sense. Could I do technical manager? Probably. I have on paper some of the experience needed. I don't think I'd want to. There's a difference between, how to put it? I have a lot of logistics experience from my time as an officer at Tech State. I've done that for a couple of things. It does definitely help in bringing projects to completion, things like that, being able to keep track of a bunch of different variables and whatnot and so forth. I don't want to manage people. That is just what it comes down to. I might have the experience, but it's not the type of person I am.
Makes sense. I have some friends, I was talking to them, would they go into management? And they, no, that it is a different job,
And I'm
managing people.
And I fortunately work for one of the few companies in the world where if you are very good, you can keep getting promoted without going into management.
I see. Yeah, that is a whole other dynamic, I suppose. People, the way people move up and down the corporate ladder.
There is no down. There is only up.
Right. True. I suppose. Don't really get demoted. You more or less find a different job.
If down is the option on the table, firing is the option on the table.
Right. So
which is another fortunate thing, sadly.
I've heard that in sort of the tech industry, in the tech space, a lot of people will talk about how in order to move up, you have to change jobs. And would you say it sounds like it might be a culture thing?
So I have an answer to this.
Okay.
No, but so I'm going to go on a tangent.
Yeah.
So this is actually really about the balance between work life or really life. This is the balance between your lifestyle and making a lot of money, which is what it comes down to. There is a lot of very good information out there, which is very correct, that if you switch jobs every couple of years, you make more money. Why? Because there's a couple of different reasons. One, in the tech industry at least, you get signing bonuses. You get accelerated stock options usually when you're getting hired. And you're generally hired at the medium or high end of whatever pay scale of the company you're going to is. When you're getting promoted internally, you're usually short-staffed on your stock options and your pay scale, unfortunately. The caveat here is you have to go job hunting. Most people don't like job hunting. It is a huge imposition on your time, for some people on your mental state. It's a balance thing. So yes, you can get promoted without job hunting, but even if you do, usually you're taking a pay bump to do that. I will probably be staying with Google personally for at least until I hit L5, and then I'll feel it out from there. But it's different people have different priorities. I like the culture of the team that I'm in, is what it comes down to. Yes.
Pretty much job hunting is kind of like a homework assignment. A big homework assignment that you really have to do it for a specific amount of time, because pretty much there's a lot of things that need to be taken care of, such as expenses of your family and rent and electricity bills and car payments if you got a new car, you name it. That's why you need to find a job right away. There's a specific amount of time.
We're just running a little short on time, so is there a question?
Yeah, I was just asking that question.
What's the
about doing it? If we have to do it in a specific amount of time to avoid.
Well, if you're already working, then no. But if you aren't, then whatever your time frame is.
Okay.
All right, we are almost out of time. Is there any last questions that anyone has?
Are there any events or conferences that Google hosts every year that you're encouraging to go to?
Are there any events or conferences that Google hosts? Thank you. The short answer is yes. I don't know off the top of my head what they are, but if you go to g.co, that's Google's page for conferences and other events. It's very lucky I know that, actually, because I used to do University Outreach for Google before they killed that program. Yes. A lot of Google's various outreach and other forms of reaching out to, not necessarily just apply pipelines, have been slowed down and or scuppered because of 2022. 2022 broke a lot of things. For instance, Google ran 3 different programming competitions, and all 3 of those got sunset, and I'm very unhappy about that. Yes.
But they're out and about. Would you say they're at in a digital space, and maybe you might find them at tech forums or something?
What was the
make repair. Where would you find opportunities to? And then,
unfortunately, right now Google's in a weird place.
Okay.
A lot of people internally, me included, want to go out and do stuff with the community.
Yeah.
On wide. But Google is not currently pursuing most of those options.
Gotcha.
That doesn't mean they won't in the future, and when they do, there's no great way of people who aren't part of the recruiting pipeline to predict what they'll go for. There was what universities Google goes to. Google specifically wants to target change on a yearly basis. What types of things Google go to change on a yearly basis. So one of the hackathons I went to was Boston. Was the MIT? I forget what it's called now. Was the MIT Boston hackathon? I forget what it's called. But Google went to that one year and then didn't go to the next year. And it's one of the most prestigious universities hackathons in the world. So
you got to look for the table.
What?
You got to look for their tables.
Yeah. Well, they just weren't there that year.
Oh, right.
One of the years. Yeah. So I don't know.
And then
it's like that.
Does anyone else have any final? And then, so what do you hope to accomplish in your career? Final question.
I hate this question. Unfortunately,
you don't have to answer it.
I'll answer
it. Big one.
The unfortunate state is I've accomplished everything I really care about in my career, at least.
Sure.
I make a lot more money than I need to live off of. I was a university student. In fact, I was a university student that was running off of government financial aid. I lived off of multiple times less than I currently make. And I still do. I'm probably going to retire early. If you've heard of FIRE, Financial Independent Retire Early, that was my plan for a while. That's still sort of my plan, but I'm less strict about it now. At some point, I'm going to leave Google. I don't know if when I leave Google, I'll go to another tech company, or I decide to, in my fantasy land, like open a business of some sort.
Sure.
I want to maybe run a board game shop. I don't know.
Just fall in the river.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Sorry. Last question.
Yeah.
Is it usually hard to get into Google, and is it possible to
This has been answered.
easily get one?
This has been answered. See previous responses.
Yeah. We can talk after lunch. But all right. Well, thanks for coming out and speaking to us. Really appreciate the opportunity and everyone being able to. Yeah. Go ahead. Do we have any follow-up? I suppose for those who weren't here, we're no meeting next week, and then our last meeting, I think, is going to be the week after that. I have to check the dates, but that would be like election officers sorting that out, and then last week I don't think we're going to meet.
Next week is Thanksgiving. Turkey.
Yep. Thanks everyone for coming.
All
right.
Yeah,
And
get
people-
food, and sign in. If you didn't sign in, and get food.
All right, and free donuts.
Are you free to people add you on LinkedIn?
I'm fine with people reaching out to me on LinkedIn. If you do, make sure to message me where you
what
met me,
section did you sign
because this
up
happens
for?
a lot, and I
Yeah.
don't know.
I think it's
That's fair.
the first one and the second lab. I don't know.
I'm at the 750 section.